Ava Carter had never been in a store this fancy before. She and her mother, Denise, were just running a quick errand to grab a gift for her uncle's birthday. The gleaming glass shelves, polished marble floors, and soft classical music playing in the background made the store feel like a museum rather than a place to shop. Denise had been hesitant to enter the upscale boutique, but Ava, a 16-year-old with a love for unique fashion, had pleaded with her mother to go inside. The moment they stepped in, Ava was drawn to a display of luxury watches. She marveled at the intricate details, the way the diamonds sparkled under the store's golden lights. It was then that she felt a shadow loom over her. "Excuse me, young lady," a sharp voice interrupted her admiration. Ava turned to see a tall, middle-aged white man in an expensive suit, his name tag reading, Mr. Reynolds, assistant manager. He looked at her with narrowed eyes, his lips pressed into a thin line. "May I help you with something?" His voice was laced with suspicion. Ava, caught off guard, smiled politely. "Oh, no, I was just looking. These are beautiful." Mr. Reynolds didn't return her smile. Instead, his eyes flicked down to her backpack. "I think you've looked enough. Let me see what's inside your bag." Ava blinked in shock. "What?" Denise, who had been browsing scarves a few feet away, turned sharply at the exchange. "Excuse me, is there a problem?" Mr. Reynolds folded his arms. "We have a strict policy against shoplifting. Your daughter has been hovering around this display for a while. I need to check her bag." Denise bristled. "Are you accusing my daughter of stealing?" "Ma'am, I'm simply following protocol. If she has nothing to hide, she won't mind proving it." Ava's cheeks burned. She knew what this was. She had read enough stories and heard enough warnings from her parents about how people would look at her differently, how they would suspect her without reason. Denise's jaw tightened, but before she could respond, Ava, her heart pounding with humiliation, unzipped her bag and held it open. "Here," she said, her voice firm but shaken. "Check it." Mr. Reynolds peered inside, rummaging through her books, her wallet, her sketchpad, and a granola bar. Of course, there was nothing stolen. He cleared his throat, as if reluctant to admit his mistake. "All right then. Just be mindful of how long you linger near valuable items." Denise had had enough. "I want to speak to your manager." "I am the assistant manager," Mr. Reynolds said, his smugness returning. "And I believe we're done here." Ava and Denise locked eyes. Ava could see the fire in her mother's expression, the same fire she had seen in boardroom meetings, at protests, and in every moment where she had to demand respect. "We're not done," Denise said coolly. "You just made a very big mistake." Mr. Reynolds chuckled dryly. "Oh? And who exactly do you think you are?" Before Denise could answer, a deep voice interrupted. "Is there a problem here?" Mr. Reynolds turned, his confident expression faltering as a tall, broad-shouldered black man in an impeccable suit approached them. The man exuded an air of authority, the kind that made people stand up straighter. Ava couldn't help but smile. "Hey, Dad." Mr. Reynolds went pale. Denise crossed her arms. "Mr. Reynolds, meet my husband, Judge Malcolm Carter." The color drained completely from Mr. Reynolds' face. Judge Carter," he stammered. Judge Carter's reputation was well known. He was one of the most respected federal judges in the state, a man who had made it his mission to fight for justice and hold people accountable for discrimination. "Yes," Judge Carter said, his voice calm but steely. "And I'd like to know why my daughter was accused of theft for simply looking at a watch." Mr. Reynolds' mouth opened and closed. It was just a misunderstanding." "It didn't seem like a misunderstanding when you were demanding to check her bag," Denise interjected. "You humiliated my daughter in front of other customers based on nothing but your assumptions." Other store employees and even a few customers had now gathered, murmuring amongst themselves. I didn't mean," Mr. Reynolds swallowed hard. "Judge Carter, please, let's not make this into something." Judge Carter held up a hand. "It already is something. You profiled my daughter. You assumed she was a thief based on nothing. Do you treat all your teenage customers like criminals, or just the black ones? Mr. Reynolds' face was drenched in sweat now. Of course not, sir. I sincerely apologize. Ava watched as her father's eyes remained cold and unreadable. You should apologize to her, he said, nodding towards Ava. Mr. Reynolds turned to her, his face tight. I'm sorry, Miss Carter. Ava stared at him for a moment before nodding. You should be. Judge Carter then turned to the store manager, who had just arrived, alerted by the commotion. I trust that this will be properly addressed? The manager, a nervous-looking woman, nodded profusely. Absolutely, sir. Mr. Reynolds, please come with me. As Mr. Reynolds scurried away, Denise turned to Ava and squeezed her hand. Are you okay, baby? Ava nodded, taking a deep breath. Yeah. Just tired of this happening. Judge Carter put a hand on her shoulder. I know. But what matters is you stood your ground, and you saw firsthand that ignorance and discrimination will always have consequences. Ava exhaled, glancing at the luxury watches one last time before looking back at her father. Let's go home. As they walked out of the store, the other customers continued whispering, some shaking their heads at what they had just witnessed. One thing was clear, this was a moment no one in that store would soon forget.